Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Change. This is How You Do It, with Dike, Inge Hervik, and Simon Powers. Today, we've got a fascinating talk with you all about the world of change. If this is your first AWA community webinar, welcome, and hello to lots of new and familiar faces. We run events like this almost every month, either online or in person, and you can join future events via our Meetup community site or our website. If you miss an event, don't worry, we record all of these events and you can find them on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/adventures with Agile. So a little bit about AWA before we get started. Everything we do is underpinned by our mission of making working life better, which we do through training, community events like today, coaching and consulting, as well as creating lots of content, writing books, creating new models, all in the name of helping making working life better. Today, we'll be hearing from Dike, who's an enterprise coach and recent graduate of our IC Agile Expert in Enterprise Coaching Program, Inge Hervik, who's head of training and coaching at AWA Norge, and Simon Powers, who is the AWA CEO and founder. This webinar is going to be a bit of a conversational style, hearing some real world stories about how Simon, Adi, and Inge are creating lasting change. And also we'd love to hear from you as well. And so we invite you to take part in the conversation, ask questions in the chat, or if you just want to sit back and enjoy the next hour. If any of the topics pique your interest, then we'll be covering this and more on our Enterprise Coach Bootcamp, which runs in London, Oslo, Belgium, and Bangkok. Or if you already have attended that class, you can join the Advanced Enterprise Expert Coach Program, which starts with Simon and Kim Greenwood online in March. You couldn't be in any better hands than with our host today. So without further ado, I hand over to Simon, Adi, and Inge.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Yeah, so we have this hour for our conversation about change, and I'm really intrigued by the title and invitation we have. This is how you do it. So we're talking boldly about change here, really. And so I really expect this to be an interesting and fun conversation. So let's have this as a free-flowing conversation, and let's see where it takes us. But I'll also prompt with some questions to give us some structure. And as Charlie mentioned, if there are any questions, please do feel free to ask. So Simon and Adi, we're now in a world full of everything. And when we look around us, why do we need change? And why do we need to change our approach to change? What do you think?
I'm happy to go first. I think some of it where, as practitioners, we are kind of familiar with a term called VUCA, fast changing, V standing for, volatility, U for uncertainty, C for complexity, and then A for ambiguity. So we understand that, globalization has networked us and networked organizations within that context in a way that was not the case decades ago. So it means that, what happens in one part of the world has unpredictable effects in other parts. And we've seen that with the Ukraine-Russia war and how that has impacted things that we were watching from afar. And we've seen that we're crisis in terms of inflation, prices of oil, gas, even food has changed, and how that's affecting how organizations work. What we're also seeing is how technology is driving some of that change. We see that technology has leveled the playing field in quite a number of sectors. And so organizations that, had previously thrived on the basis of scale don't really have that advantage to them anymore. We're also seeing an emergence of different types of companies like Uber, Airbnb, which suggests that even models organizations are having to be innovative in their operating model. So it's not just about how they work or their processes, it's the models that they operate. And so traditional change management techniques that were more one and done type change, ways of managing change don't really hold water now. Now it is the organizations that build that capability to change. And so the change techniques we deploy have to, have that sort of nuanced approach and be very iterative in the way that we do them. So those are what I see as the main thing. It's not about just one transformation, one and done. It's about building a way of being that can respond to unanticipated sort of changes in the environment, as well as, the more anticipated ones. So those are my thoughts on why it's necessary.
Brilliant. What more can we add to that? I mean, you've got the big macro events, as you discussed. The internal mechanisms of organizations need to change. I think probably the only thing I could think of here as a way that as we work more and more online, there are elements of our lives that we seem more connected, but we're also much more separate. And there's a certain sense of growing of isolation and lack of well-being. And I'm certainly getting more engaged with and seeing more online as well about people looking after each other, looking after your own self, to make sure that there isn't things like burnout, isolation, depression, all these other kind of things that are affecting people across the workforce. And so when we look at change and the nature of change as it picks up pace, as the deepness of that change happens more frequently to be deeper, then I think that combining this in with how do we actually connect with each other in the workplace in more than just the superficial way. When we used to be in the office, we would bump into people, talk to people about what you did at the weekend and things. When we come to Zoom, it's very much we're here for this reason. We're meeting on this topic for this thing. We're expecting to get these results out at the end of this call. And so there's a certain loss of information and quality of information about ourselves as human beings. And so when we look at change programs now, we really want to make sure we connect in with what that means as a person. How does that affect the individual's experience of work in this new world that we found ourselves in? Because ultimately, when we talk about culture and how we operate and how we collaborate and how we innovate, then we can't ignore the fact that when somebody's depressed or doesn't feel like they want to join in, or they feel isolated, or they're stuck in patterns of isolation, how is that going to really affect on the aggregate culture of an organization, which affects innovation, etc. So there's the macro events and also the inner work of change as well. So I don't know whether we've answered your question specifically around why is change needed per se. I think that change in itself is inevitable. It is a phenomena of life itself. Change, if you don't adapt, you die, either as an individual or as a species, certainly as an organization. So change is an inherent drive that comes from being a life form.
And you're also talking about that it's picking up pace, and as we all have experienced, also talking about this accelerated pace of change has become easier to talk about, especially after the pandemic, and we've seen a lot of other things going on. But you're mentioning both the macro and the inner. So in our cultures, where we are driving towards or we are trying to change our cultures to adapt to this new way of living in the world, what do we see on the macro level? What are your examples of seeing this in the organizations?
Yeah, for me, I can think of, sort of one big player in the oil and gas, and maybe this is something that is applicable across sectors. But yeah, there was an understanding that there are smaller players who were more nimble, who had tech on their side, and sort of shorter lines of communication within their organizations, being strong players in the market. So some of that change is tech driven, but new entrants into the market, as well as those existing players who have some scale and have some reach. That's what we were seeing in those, and I think that plays out across sectors.
And having been doing this for a fair while now, I'm seeing things come in cycles. And when we say, oh, the economy is really bad at the moment, or the economy is good at the moment, and we've seen a rise in interest rates and inflation and things like this, which does have a knock-on effect in terms of customer spending and the general flow of a company's money based on either their borrowing or their supply or demand rather. And so this leads to another round of consolidations or layoffs or mergers or reprioritization of work. And so the normal run of the mill of capitalism, which is an up and down flow, it's we get peaks, we get troughs. This is normal. And so this has a knock-on effect of change in the strategies of companies in terms of their buying and their merging, etc., and what they need to build. And I think also the other thing is that as we get more and more online, more and more virtual, we're constantly on our phones, the consumer mindset is now. Yes. And the complexity of the products that we're building, which need to be delivered now, is rising. So we've got an increase in cost. We've got a decrease in the length of time that people stay interested on things. So the lifetime of products is shorter. And we've got an increase in complexity, increase in cost, shorter lifespan, so that the amount you invest is actually paying returns back over a shorter period, and customers are demanding more and more over a shorter period. So it's becoming harder and harder for organizations to meet those demands. And for that, we need better ways of working, and the old silo-based team-based structures and things that have time to plan and think and grow and execute these things. There just simply isn't enough time anymore. We need smaller iterations to meet things where they are, and we've known this for 20 years, right? So it's not a new phenomena.
So going back to the culture part then, so you're talking about smaller, it's going faster, we're having customers who want something now at a lower cost, and the cost is also at lower price, and the cost is going up. So going into these organizations, which are becoming more successful in being able to cope with change, what would we see?
Do you mind if I step in on this one, Addy, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, go for it, Sam.
So what is calling out across organizations to me is the need for corporate entrepreneurism. And this is an odd thing, because you've got people who are entrepreneurs tend to be motivated by a sense of freedom, flexibility, a sense of type of reward, and a sort of free range of what they want, especially to do with how they spend and receive money. A corporate structure tends to be safer, I won't say safe, a safer environment where there are grades you increase over a time. There are certain rules and constraints around how you operate as a product person. And where is that sort of the corporate structure of conformity and slow progression over an entrepreneur mindset? And to have this kind of innovation approach of continual basically continual delivery and continual innovation requires more of an entrepreneurial mindset in a structure which perhaps doesn't suit an entrepreneur mind. And so this seems to be where organizations are really pushing the boundaries in our change world of, like, what's the latest edge of change? It's how are we able to have this free thinking, empowered person or powered people in a corporate structure where it's a meritocracy. If you don't, your last project, you're measured on your last project. Are you successful or not? that's not the way an entrepreneur mindset works. And so this is the edge for me of what needs to change. So some thinking around this.
And yeah, in terms of what examples that I'm seeing, so I worked with an organization, I mentioned this oil and gas organization, that had a number of key sort of product areas. One, because of the fact that, net zero center and front for this organization, they were looking to develop, sort of, fuels that were, highly efficient, renewable source energy. So it was around product mix. They were trying to develop a product mix that would work with that a net zero future. But because it was uncharted territory, there was a recognition that, adopting an experimentation culture, a culture that provided an integrated service to, whether it be to B2B or B2C customers. And that meant sort of coming out of silos, which was quite inherent in the organization, but coming together to think in terms of value streams that provided a seamless, if you like, feel to the customer. But it was also about, product mix, offering choice, where it was cost efficient to do so, bringing a measure of process and product flexibility to deal with different geographic markets, being an international organization. So those were some of the considerations that the organization had to take into context to be able to fulfill that vision, of a net zero, contributing to a net zero future.
So you're mentioning this experimental culture. For people who haven't experienced that, what are the main things to look for? What is an experimental culture really?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to start. I think at its very root, it is just being able to try out new things and create an environment where it is okay to do that, understanding that experiments may fail as well as succeed. And particularly in the case that I just described, where the future is so uncertain, the infrastructure for that net zero future is hardly in place. And so an organization within that sector that is looking to thrive has to be comfortable with trying out new things. So there's an element of having structures in place that enable that. So what I found really helpful was innovation labs that helped to try out new ways of being. So it could be culture focused, it could be process or ways of working focus, it could be business model focus. So you can try out anything within an experimentation context and just bring in teams. What I found that works is bringing in teams that really want to be, who that are very innovative and are happy to be early adopters rather than trying to roll out something new like this across the patch. And I found that helps. The other thing that really helped was in the area of product innovation, having a system that enabled them to sandbox certain ideas and sort of take them through to be, a process whereby you'd check the value to the organization and the feasibility. So we had a process for product innovation where ideas were funneled through and evaluated by peers. And then those that really made it through or were seen as really valuable and very feasible were either, provided mentors, they were championed or, provided resources. And, the top 5 ideas, the people who submitted those ideas would be rewarded by, some sort of reward. So that I find helps that culture of experimentation, as well as other reward and performance mechanisms that really are focused around rewarding innovation.
Brilliant. That's very that's a brilliant, tangible approach of experimentation. So I was trying to think, what could I add to that? And I was thinking, well, maybe I'll go slightly into the intangible underlying
Love
belief.
that.
Yeah, the underlying belief of what needs to be there for an experimentation culture. And I think there needs to be somebody who holds a sort of shining light of what good looks like. What is it that we actually are trying to achieve here? What's the underlying feeling I get that I know when we've arrived? What are we doing for our customers? What is that thing? And in a small startup, that's very obvious to see who that is. That's normally the founders. And like I was saying, who is that entrepreneur holding that? This is the most amazing thing we're doing right now in our company or in this space. This is where we're going. We don't know how to get there. We don't know exactly the steps of exactly what this thing's going to look like, but we do understand the customer benefit. Once we understand the customer benefit, we're able to then say, right, how do we get exactly the right combination of things? What features do we need? What is it this? Is it that? And then you test with the customer. So that underlying belief of knowing what good looks like, what that is, someone needs to own that. Otherwise, I feel that I've seen experimentations become vague, unmeasurable. We don't really know where we're going. And the aggregate of many experimentations, is it actually going in the right direction? How do you know?
Yes.
Well, unless we've got some shining light at the end of what we think, where we're sort of roughly heading, then we don't know what to measure and how when we're going to get there. And the only other thing I'll say with experimentation is this definition of what success and failure is. Success is following the process, which sounds odd for me to say that, but it's are we actually running an experiment that is tested and that we know whether we've moved further towards our shining light or away? And failure is we haven't got a clue what we've done, and we don't know whether we've moved whether we've done something that's good or not. You might have done something amazing, but if you haven't got a clue about it, that in my book, that's not a success.
Brilliant.
I agree with that. And it's so important to have that data-driven approach, and which is why I really so much in favor of, I mean, whatever you call it, whether innovation labs, but having a little structure to, how to create these experiments and how you're going to measure it, and also leveraging those those teams, those people who were part of those experiments to share that learning, because that brings credibility across the organization, is what I found really, really helpful in fostering that. I've also found that when I've worked with, when there's engagement at a certain level within the organization, it's much easier to foster that cultural change. So the ones where I've, coached quite a few transformations with differing measure of success, but the ones that stick out in my mind as, where that cultural change was in the right direction, it's typically with, sponsors with sufficient seniority in the organization who are so bought into it, who have credibility with their peers and with, other people within that organization. They clear about purpose, they're clear about motives, and they're clear about, how the principles of engagement, even if they don't know exactly how they're going to go about it. And I've found that to be so helpful in terms of creating, any kind of culture, not just experimentation, collaboration, ways of working.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that we're now talking about the vision. So how does it look like? What could it be? So if we're talking about changing our culture, we need to have some kind of idea of the vision. Probably we also have some kind of reason to have that market fit. But we're talking about culture, and we also just talked about structure. So the first question was, I talked about what is this culture? And you were sharing about structures that we need in place. So we're seeing that these structures are things we are putting in place in order to move towards a culture that's a better fit with the world, how the world is now.
Yes.
And one other thing I would like to pull out from what you said is this meritocracy you mentioned, Simon, because we're living in a meritocracy. So whoever wins is able to control more of whatever happens. They are able to gain something from it, but it's in their mindset. So in our Western culture, at least, we are about winning. And you mentioned that the success in experiment is following the process. So it's playing to that winning. So how can we leverage the inner workings of the culture that you talked about as well, not only the outer structures? How can we work with the inner parts?
So when you say how do we work with the inner parts, do you mean when I was talking about the inner feelings that each of us hold, which then affect our day and our ability to form relationships and create a collaborative space?
Yeah.
So there are tools and skills which are well known in other areas of human development, for example, in the therapy world, in the world of relationships, of how to talk in a way which is constructive to building stronger relationships when we talk about our feelings and emotions. So typically emotions, feelings have been off the table in most of our corporate settings. We don't talk about those things. You be professional. And what they're actually saying is this professional mask goes on and we show up and we're always right. We're always successful. And if you're having a shitty day, deal with it yourself, take that out and keep showing up as this person. Maybe we can have a little conversation about it, but we certainly can't have a conversation about deep feelings, deep emotional things, especially if they affect other people in the office or even with them. This would seen as can often be a conflict or can create such tension that people have their own emotional reactions to that, which quickly breaks down the relationship. So if we really want to build amazing cultures, then we need to bring our whole selves to work. And this means developing a very clear vocabulary and a very clear set of tools around being able to share what's happening on the inside, as well as what's happening in the world of the professional kind of, hey, I'm so amazing, look at my CV. We need to basically be able to show up as real people, because then we can actually have real conversations, collaborate on stuff, and bring up the things which are actually blocking us from being able to create flow in our own lives of energy, innovation, connection, flow in our relationships, brainstorming, innovation, creating amazing ideas with lots of people, flow of our products that can then get stuff out the door in this short iteration, which lowers risk. All of this, I believe, pins down to our lack of ability to show up as a real whole person. And that's because I feel that we've somehow become so scared of our emotions and being emotional overwhelmed that we avoid it at all costs. So I think bringing this in slowly, gently, with some good vocabulary, good skills, can open up relationship, which creates a much deeper sense of we're in this together. And I feel that that's really the next frontier.
I totally agree. I've been looking into things like the systems element and what is really has been present for me over these last few months of looking is the impact that interconnectedness makes on team and organizational performance. And probably people who operate in the HR domain already know this, that because part of those engagement surveys, I mean, they ask you one curious question: do you have a friend in the organization? And it may seem like a silly question, but the research shows that people who have generative relationships in the workplace tend to stay longer, they tend to do better. And that is just really a nod to that, the humanity of regardless of sector, all of that, it's relevant, but that human element, that human connection element is so important. And so things like psychological safety, I know that they feel like, buzzwords, but the importance of psychological safety, the importance of, social intelligence, emotional intelligence is beginning to take greater prominence in organizational studies, understanding an awareness of our impact, within the system, within one-to-one communications, which can be hugely pivotal for whatever it is that we're doing, is now something that leaders and coaches are exploring more, as well as some of that inner working, those self-limiting beliefs that make us believe that we are just our CV, rather than how we can show up more authentically in those situations. And leaders that do that tend to have a lot more engagement, as well as coaches, because we are instrument of change as well. So we too have to be aware of our inner world and how we're showing up, and how to pivot, in the context of those interactions that we have.
So there's a question as well from the chat on this. So the question is directly: do you have experience with this with senior leaders on bringing out emotions or working with the emotions as well?
Yeah, I mean, this work is all based on what we practice and how we take this into organizations. And there's a really clear correlation between the length of time it takes to sort out tangible out there problems based upon how leaders are able to talk about their emotions. So the experiences that I've had with one leadership group, for example, we've been asked to go in to solve something to do with product. You go in there to look at the product side. There's clashes within the internal leadership team, and those people were able to say, initially it was like, we don't need coaching, we don't need this stuff, it's the product teams that need to be sorted out, sort them out. Very quickly you see the dysfunction comes through leaders pulling in different directions, or there's certain egos or certain things that are happening. And so by giving people a vocabulary, having sessions where people can work that out, you actually solve the product issues in a matter of weeks or months. And that's kind of how long things take in my experience. We have another client who won't engage with that. 18 months later, we're still going around the same problems. Different people have left, people have come, without dealing with the being able to talk openly about what's happening, because we're so worried about emotional overwhelm or creating emotional overwhelm in others, just prolongs the entire change effort. So in that particular group, we tried all sorts of things, stepping around, not talking about emotions, and the same problems just keep coming back. Yeah. But one really good clearing session where people are able to talk using the vocabulary, using the tools, so it isn't overwhelming, moves people on within weeks and months to solve real tangible problems. So yes.
So I'll share a short thing that I use sometimes as well, and that is as just a question: what is important to you? And I think it's really hard, even for senior leadership, to answer this question without noticing some kind of emotional reaction as well, because this is important. You can see it in the body language, and we can just discuss about that. So looking at what is important to you, it's not logical, it's emotional. So there needs to be a connection to a value if it's important.
Bringing people back into the body. Where do you feel that? What's happening for you here? How do you know that you feel that emotion? Where is that feeling? What's going on? This is like somatic coaching. And then we borrow also from the therapy world as well. So if we want to talk about emotions, rather than being, and we teach this on the Enterprise cohort program. So how to use this language. It's called parts language. And it will be something like, rather than speaking from or speaking from your angry part, but you're not completely angry, like it's like there's a part of me that's angry. So I can say, hey, there's a part of me that's feeling really angry right now. Now, how does that sound, rather than I'm really angry right now? There's a part of me that feels really angry right now, and I'd really like to talk to you about that. So even just like, and there's a whole language behind this, and it takes 2 minutes to learn. And you can start using these languages with senior leaders, and you can start to share emotions that aren't overwhelming. And it's amazing how just shifting our language slightly can change it from being critical and attacking to vulnerable and sharing something from the inside, and really getting to the root beyond the emotion of what the unmet need is in that person. And once people start being able to talk about their real unmet needs, it goes from, I need my product right now, to, I'm really concerned that if my customer moans again, this is really going to reflect badly on me.
Yeah.
Totally two different conversations.
Yeah. And it sounds also like they're connecting togetherness again. But another emotional thing I would like to just ask you as well, our approach, how we approach change, how can we say with such certainty that we're supporting organization to change without resistance, not just removing resistance, because that's change management as well, but our approach is about without resistance. What is that about? How do we do that?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it's about not having resistance, but it is about I would say the resistance works in one's favor if we understand that, the transformation has to be a co-created process. And so where it's the case that change is being done to a group of people, I've never seen it end well. Or, there are some change initiatives that have been sort of driven from the center, maybe the center of excellence has said, we're all going to work in this way. I have rarely seen that work well. Or when they say we need to spin up 100 squads, rarely ever do you get the desired outcome from that. So my view is that it works well when there is a clear one call to action, when there is an understanding of why the change is happening in the first place. And I where that is in place and the motives, what good looks like, is understood and co-created, that future reality is co-created together, it works really well. So when I start out with teams and starting from scratch, I typically, let them know that mine is I'm not here to facilitate agile adoption. I'm here to understand what are your needs, why you need to change, what are your competitive priorities, and, co-create with you, understand what your blockers are, and then we work together to understand what good might look like. And so I would typically start off with workshops with leadership and other stakeholders who can really speak to that process, so that they are part of a process of change. And then also, in this oil and gas company in particular, and I keep coming back to them because I was there for almost 3 years, and worked in several different entities within that organization. But this particular transformation that was hugely successful, having a guiding coalition, a group of people who had influence within the business, who were really, really motivated. So that, that credibility factor, people who could tell us how certain experiments were landing on the ground, as well as be part of that process of co-creating the strategy, really helped to, I wouldn't say get rid of resistance, but bring some credibility to the whole process. And so buy-in took years. It didn't happen instantaneously, but we at least were building up stories. We were creating value cases which showcased how some of the experiments were landing the value that they were providing, the problems that they were solving. And so people came along and were swept up in some of that enthusiasm, and having people who were part of that process talk to them, rather than we coaches being preachy in the way that we talk about business agility, I think was hugely instrumental to I don't even know if I can use the word overcoming resistance, because it just helped overcome resistance. But it didn't mean to say that there weren't people who were resistant. So, for instance, the SVP didn't believe that there needed to be agile adoption. His mantra was that we are agile already, but we were lucky that he delegated the transformation to somebody of sufficient seniority who had that credibility with the rest of the organization. So that's what built in some of that momentum. And then eventually once he saw how well it was doing, began to, sponsor appropriately and speak at webinars and really endorse, agility as a way of being and operating. So yeah, I've seen it overcome resistance, as you say. But yeah, it has to be a guiding coalition, motivated people who are part of it, and them taking accountability for the transformation themselves. If they feel we are the ones, we are like project managers, then I think that's where you will see a lot of resistance. But where they feel part of it themselves, I think that, there's a lot more chance of success.
Anything to add, Simon?
Yeah, for sure. I think that you've covered most of that, Adi. Brilliant example, because the co-creation is the first mindset to get into. If we're not co-creating, we're fighting against, then of course that then sets up the perfect example for resistance. The only thing I can add to that is that everywhere there is resistance, there is a gift about to happen. Something in there, when there is resistance, it's not about overcoming that by force, by power. If we are taking that mindset, then we are reverting back to a non-collaborative, non-type of innovation space, because we're dominating through our sheer momentum and all the skills and wonderful politics we can do to railroad our day through, because of course we're right. That's no culture to set up precedents for. So instead, what we're looking to do is, one is the co-creation, and where there is resistance, what is about to emerge? Can we remain in a sense of curiosity? If we can stay in curiosity and we're not afraid, again, of overwhelm, what if my transformation fails? What if this resistance crushes what I'm doing? What if I'm not worth anything? What if I'm no good as a transformation agent, or whatever? It doesn't matter what it is. Any of these things come up. This is a form of emotional overwhelm. And it's the same thing that's happening for the person who's feeling or wants to create that resistance. What's happening to my job? What's happening to the ways we're doing? And it could just be something like, no, I just totally believe the way we're already doing things is working well. Stop changing stuff. This is perfectly good. So if we can have that language again of exploring what that means, then we won't get emotional resistance, because we can express our emotions. When you express emotions, you receive the gift.
Yeah.
And that's really where I see it being. It's like, let these things come with curiosity, let the thing unfold, understand the gift, use that within the solution in co-creation.
So summarizing some of what you've said now, it's a lot about co-creation, but I'm also hearing having that clear motivation purpose. So if we know together where are we headed, at least, we then start co-creating that space. And it seems like there's also some kind of accountability. People are starting to self-organize towards that understood purpose. There might be some resistance, but we can express it. We can start talking about it. And I think that is where we come, including the who is going to change in the enterprise change pattern. So what are workshops or facilitation ways we could use, or you have used, in order to meet people, to include them, to co-create after this motivational purpose has been set? What are your examples?
For me, one of them has been appreciative inquiry, because it gives groups even across boundaries. You can apply it across boundaries or with teams. And the starting point is where they are now. What's their current reality? And it gives them the opportunity to really talk about that, what's going great in how things are, what could it be even better? And then what do they dream would be great? So rather than staying in the problem space, you're articulating a future that really sparks the creative parts of the team's brain. And then you begin to think about, what would get us there, and then what do we need to do now to make that happen. So you have a bit of an action plan that obviously can iterate over time, but a starting point and some consensus. You've had the opportunity to share thoughts. I think that's a great way of doing it. It's just one of many ways. Other ways have included, just being clear about the vision, having a purpose statement, what values need to underpin the way we want to operate, what behaviors will help us, achieve those values, and what specific activities could we be doing. And then designing a team alliance or working agreement or charter that denotes, how, we would want to work, can be really helpful. So many different ways, really. Design thinking approaches I've used. Some teams like that approach because it just allows, thinking, divergence of thought, and then just converging on something that they can start with. Those are some of the thoughts that come to mind. And then on the course, I mean, we learned quite a few things, which I'll let Simon say some of, sense making, tools, which were like integral theory, which I absolutely love. And I'm not slavish about frameworks, but I guess what I like about it is that it allows you to look at the individual level, which, Simon was talking about inner work, and then look at team dynamics, and then look at systems, processes, and, the wider context, which I think is quite useful for a coach. It brings credibility that you're thinking of all the issues. You're not just inner world only, which some business leaders will see as woo-woo, right? But if you can connect all of the various elements, I think you come out with what seems like a credible understanding of their business. So yeah, there's so many, really.
Thank you. So could I ask a different question from you then, Simon? Because I know that, as we talked about, there's a lot happening in the world. Times are tougher now. And we do know that people, when under stress, they want to have something more safe. And we talked about this is more of an iterative approach instead of creating a plan. But for the leaders who need that plan to feel safe, for those who are asking for getting that plan before we start, how can we work with them in the beginning? How do we start that dialogue?
Give them a plan.
Give them a plan, yeah.
They would love a plan.
For a plan, let's give them a plan. What's in that plan might change, right? So rather than the specifics of a whole bunch of well-defined features, fixed time, fixed scope, all those other things that we'd love to have if we lived in a merely complicated world, we need to be able to create a plan. I like plans. I love plans. When I get stressed, I go to my spreadsheet and I start working out plans. And it makes me feel safe, makes me feel good. So we need to meet people where they are and help people to have realistic plans, roadmaps, product roadmaps, product plans, change plans. There's nothing wrong with planning. I love planning. How we plan and what we put in those plans is the key thing. But given we've only got a few minutes now, probably talking about detailed planning isn't probably the best use of everyone's time, but certainly meet people where they are, give them what they want.
Yeah. And another thing that I thought of when you said that is working with leaders who need that plan, give them also options for at what time could we also look at it again and maybe
Yeah,
so
have these things in real time. We've got enough stuff now for product development to be completely done in real time, and then you don't need to ask again. Look at the plan. There it is. It's there real time. People are updating stuff. It's happening automatically as the work gets complete. You know, we've had technology to do that for the last 15, 16 years, especially in software development.
So my last question for you, and we need to have a short answer, but it's a big one maybe as well. But what is the most important thing that you would like to give our participants today? It's Christmas time, so let's give them a gift. What is the most important thing around change that you would like to share with them?
3 minutes to...
I'd like to just share that you don't need to know everything to be a change agent. And one of the beauties of being part of the Adventures with Agile community, and indeed any community, is that, you know, feel free to reach out to every single one of us, you know, at different points in the transformation, but be bold, be curious, as Simon says, in what it is you want to do, because you really want to energize people. And don't be afraid of failing, but know that you've got a safety net in the community. That's my contribution.
Anyone wants to ask any questions here as well, we can certainly try and answer them in a minute or so of us finishing. That really extends Adi's point of being a community and being connected. Never lose sight of what's actually really happening, what's real, rather than what's made up. We make up stuff all the time in our heads, continually making up, extrapolating what the real facts are because we don't have the real things. We make up things to feel safe. We make up stuff about other people. Constantly making up stuff in our heads is what we do, right? Yeah. So as change agents, we need to cut through that, and we'll lead a lot happier lives if we can be ruthlessly, in a nice way, honest with ourselves.
And the coaching approach is ruthless compassion as well. So this has been a great hour. I really enjoyed this. We started about really talking about why change in the world now, and we went into culture, talked about what it might look like, and for me that is a kind of vision as well. So we have some idea where might we work towards. We talked about that we need to have some structures in place in order to change the culture, and also being data-driven, trying to create experiments, understanding what are we doing and how is it impacting our approach to where we would like to be. We talked about emotions, and we continued actually talking a lot about emotions, about vision, about motivation, about appreciation and dreaming even. So these are all words that we're using which have the emotional contact. So it's a lot about bringing the whole self into this. And I think that's important for accountability in the change as well. And we even touched upon planning. So meet them where they are. We need the plan. Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I would like to thank you both for a great session, and thank you all for joining us. I would also like to remind you of the courses that are coming up, as Charlie shared in the beginning as well. We have enterprise boot camps, we have enterprise cohort, where I would say we have fun using those kind of things, because I know I'm a trainer on them as well. So it's really fun, engaging, and insightful as well. Also, we love to support you if there's other things you might need, consulting or ideas, or just reach out if there's any questions as well. Anything to add, Charlie?
I think you covered everything. Nice summary of some really broad and deep topics that were covered. It was fascinating. Thank you, Adi and Simon, and Inge.
There was one question in there which was about how do we keep connected with input and discussions as a group.
Okay.
How do we interact with us? We've talked a bit about, you know, how do we support each other, or what's the mechanics of that? That was the question. Certainly, if you've been on any of the AWA courses, we have a Slack channel where everybody who's ever been on a course can join in, and there, you know, it comes and goes in terms of its how many people use it, but at least 300 or 400 people are normally active at any one time, and you've got over 1,000. When I say active, they're at least listening and being present and logging in. So there's that, and then I guess without that it'd be LinkedIn, wouldn't it? We'd just have to create a LinkedIn group or something like that, or how do we, what's the meetups?
Yeah, we've got our meetups that we run monthly, so we do lots of events like this that we do each month online, and then we also run some in-person meetups in London, and things like that. And then also we've got the newsletter, so the Agile Onion, which we share tips every month through as well, and our LinkedIn, AWA Global and AWA Norge LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah.
Or are you going to add, Inge?
No, I was yes, thank you. So I was just thanking you, really. And yeah, I think that was it from us.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and have a lovely holiday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.